This section is going to consider nutrition and metabolism as an add-on to the digestive system material. There is a separate chapter for this in the book, but I just want to highlight a couple of ideas that have to do with this that I think they're important. While there's a good bit that can be said about nutrition and metabolism, I really just want to concentrate on a broad definition of what nutrition is and the essential nutrients that we need, and then in metabolism just to look at carbohydrate catabolism, getting energy out of glucose essentially. A common way of thinking about nutrition, which is probably getting a little bit outdated now, is the classic food pyramid. This is trying to set up how we need certain amounts of things in our diet together. There's actually an older version of the pyramid that has it in layers. So the big things that we need, like grains and vegetables and fruits, are on the bottom, and the things that we need very little of, like oils or sweets, would be at the very top of the pyramid. This version was trying to update that a little bit and also include the idea that you need to move, get exercise, and everything's working towards an apex. It's not the greatest representation, and it's actually been changed a bit recently. While the pyramid concept was the way of instructing the public about proper nutrition, sort of thinking about building towards something, this was updated by the First Lady 5 or 6 years ago maybe, to represent the MyPlate representation. So people can look at their plate of food and decide if they're eating a balanced meal, if certain proportions of their plate are made up of the certain types of things we need in our diet. So if you have a plate with a huge slab of meat on it, that's too much protein for a balanced meal. What I want to touch on with nutrition, rather than just the idea of a balanced meal, is also to consider essential nutrients. There are certain molecules that we need to get into our diet because we can't synthesize them in our body directly. So those are the essential amino acids and the essential fatty acids. This table shows the essential amino acids, the ones that have to be consumed in our diet, versus the non-essential amino acids, which can be formed within the body through metabolic processes, specifically anabolism, which is building things up. Now, the importance about essential amino acids is that all organisms have a protein load, the proteins they have to make to be successful, and they need the right amino acids in their diet to do that. Now, the best way to get the correct amino acids in our diet is to eat animals that also have the same protein load as we do. However, for people that for various reasons don't want to eat animals, they can make sure that they get the correct essential amino acids in their diet by eating proper nutrition. The best way of getting the correct mix of essential amino acids in your diet is to eat a meal that has a mix of legumes, which are like beans, and certain grains. So the perfect mix in a vegetarian diet is beans and rice, or lentils and quinoa, or something like that. Those types of meals will provide the essential amino acids that an animal needs without having to go to animal proteins as a source. The essential fatty acids are special types of unsaturated fatty acids, and they're essential because we need them to make phospholipids for cell membranes. Now, first off, saturated versus unsaturated. A saturated fatty acid chain is one that only has single bonds in it. Unsaturated is when it has a double bond, which puts a little bit of a kink into the chain so it doesn't lay perfectly flat and mesh with neighboring chains. Now, when we make phospholipids with the essential fatty acid monounsaturated or unsaturated, then it sets up a little bit of a more fluidity in the cell membrane, which is necessary for cell membranes to work properly. The essential fatty acids are omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. They don't necessarily have to be monounsaturated. That can be performed within the body to make the phospholipids. But what's important is where the first double bond is found in the chain. Now, one end of a fatty acid chain has a carboxyl group, a carbon double bonded to an oxygen and single bonded to a OH group. And the other end is called the omega end. If we count in from that end, wherever the first double bond lays, that's how we number that. So in this picture, we see a double bond in the 6th position, making this an omega-6 fatty acid. The other double bonds don't matter where they're located. It's the first one from the omega end. If the 3rd bond in was the first double bond, then this would be an omega-3 fatty acid. The best sources for these types of acids, the best source for these types of fatty acids are certain vegetable oils like flaxseed oil and I think sunflower oil. You can get it in walnuts and pecans. And then also fish oil is a great source for it. And oftentimes people that are taking supplements for these types of fatty acids will take fish oil pills as a great source for it. These two images are posters that I pulled off of the internet. I actually own these posters to keep them in my office. And they show all of the metabolic reactions that are taking place within the cells of your body. Now, you'd really have to zoom in on these to see how much detail there is in these reactions, but this is all of metabolism. And the point I'm making is I don't want to show you all of this. I just want to concentrate on what's happening to make energy from carbohydrates, mainly glucose. Carbohydrate metabolism was originally introduced back in A&P1 within the context of the muscular system, making ATP for muscles to be able to contract. This is a brief overview of what's going on. It starts with glycolysis, where glucose is broken down into 2 pieces, and then one of those pieces is slightly modified and attached to a coenzyme. It then goes into a cycle of chemical reactions to completely break down what's left of the glucose. And energy that's harvested from all those steps then go into an electron transport chain, which gives us the ability to make a whole bunch of ATP. Glycolysis involves 9 to a dozen different chemical reactions, but this is a run-through of the basic phases of what happens. First, glucose gets phosphorylated, which takes some ATP to get started. And then some energy is extracted in the form of electrons, and then everything's broken down and we get ATP back out. 2 ATP go in, 4 ATP come out, giving us 2 ATP net in the process of breaking down glucose and glycolysis. At the top of this figure is how half of the glucose molecule, called pyruvate, loses 1 carbon to carbon dioxide, and the other 2 carbons are incorporated into a molecule attached to coenzyme A. That then enters into the Krebs cycle, which is just a repeating series of reactions that incorporate the 2 carbons that came from pyruvate in, and then eventually gets rid of both of them through carbon dioxide. All of this is happening inside the mitochondrion, and only when oxygen is present. I don't care that you know the chemical structure so much. Just understand that this is a series of reactions that repeat over and over again, helping to break down the last of the carbohydrates that we've taken in for each glucose. Besides the energy that's harvested from glucose along those steps in the path in the form of ATP, all of the other energy is found in the form of electrons. And those electrons go to the electron transport chain, which is a series of proteins in the inner mitochondrial membrane that use the electron energy to pump hydrogen ions, or protons, across the membrane, building up a high concentration of hydrogen ions in the intermembrane space. The only way for those protons to get out is through a molecule that uses the physical movement of the protons to power connecting a phosphate to ADP, making ATP. In that process, the electrons are used to reduce oxygen so that it can combine with those protons, giving us water. And at the end of the picture, we see energy harvested from carbohydrates used to power the production of ATP. Here we go back to that original summary of the steps that are involved in getting energy out of glucose. And we see some real numbers for how much ATP is made. 2 ATP are produced in the end through glycolysis directly. A couple of ATP are made directly in the Krebs cycle, but the majority of the ATP is made through the activity in the electron transport chain. And those electrons are coming from each stage in the step, as we can see in the yellow line on the right-hand side of this figure. These lists just highlight the important points through the process. The citric acid cycle is also known as the Krebs cycle, and here I'm including the step where pyruvate is attached to the coenzyme. Pyruvate can also be referred to as pyruvic acid, and then anywhere that we see NADH or FADH2, that's referring to carrier molecules that are holding on to those electrons that are being picked up. Consider this question. When you feel that you've reached an answer, hit the next button to go into the next slide, which will reveal the correct answer. The essential nutrients that we looked at in this section were the essential amino acids, of which tryptophan and methionine are both included, and the essential fatty acids, of which linoleic acid is one. Cholesterol is not an essential nutrient. We can actually produce cholesterol from other sources within our body if need be.